Welcome to today's podcast, brought to you by Profectus Livestock Solutions. If you liked today's video, like and share it. I'm Devin Stricherz, and today my guest is Brandon Rodriguez.
Hey, good to be with you today.
Brandon, today I want to talk a little bit about industry standards, a little bit about the markets out there in the cattle industry. It's kind of a crazy time to be in the cattle industry and to be owning them and selling them and moving around. So there's kind of a lot of moving parts in the cattle industry, and let's get it started off with that.
Yeah, so it is kind of a wild time. The things we hear from guys out in the country, especially this year, last fall, 2024, a lot of guys were saying feeder calves were very high. A lot of the feedlots I work with that kind of take calves in, that 5-6-ish weight. All the way to finish, we're saying calves were, just high, and, there wasn't a whole lot of profit in them at that point. And then, you look at guys that are doing yearlings, same thing. Margins are probably even thinner when it comes to yearlings. So it's been a hard time for a lot of guys to try to pencil in some profit. And doing some management things, some nutrition stuff. There's a lot of things out there you can do to try to help yourself get a little more dollars out of them. So I don't know, Devin, what are some of the things that you see a lot of guys, you probably talk to more cattle producers than I do day-to-day basis, kind of what are you hearing from guys in the country and some of their concerns as far as maybe profitability goes, or what they're hearing from markets and kind of what they're seeing out there in the sale barns too?
Right now, the cow-calf guy, he's been feeling good. He's been feeling pretty good for the last few years, other than the inputs moving up the way they have. The cow-calf guy has been in a good position the last few years to market them calves. I think there's different ways of marketing now. Has changed quite drastically. The old barbecue sale on October 15th or whatever it may be has kind of changed a little bit. I think guys are a lot more diligent in what they're doing. And I think they have to be to do some of that stuff on the calf marketing side of things. I saw some of these sale barns, Bassett, Nebraska, some of these direct calf contracts out of Montana. They're pretty high. They're smoking right now. And so, being able to market these cattle is important for the cow-calf producer, not just hauling them to the everyday sale barn like they've done year after year. Because I think if you're doing that and not looking at other options, you are missing out on some potential profit there. The yearling guys, the guys in the background in feed yards buying these calves, I don't know how they're paying for them. They probably don't really know how they're paid for them as well. Yeah. It's kind of crazy world right in that calf check right now for a 9-weight steer or 7-weight heifer, something like that. It's just been quite crazy. So there is some risk there, but there's optimism in the market. The cow herd's down. Numbers are short. We're making bigger carcasses on the back end, so we are producing probably similar beef, but the numbers, the rebuild, it's not there. You're starting to see some heifer retention, but it's not quite like it should be yet. I think you're seeing a lot of older producers stepping out of the game a little bit on the cow-calf side. Why wouldn't you? I mean, you're offered kind of a all-time high, lifetime high of cattle, and you're in a position to kind of capitalize on some of it. And I think some of these guys are taking some of that routes. And so, on the finishing side, it's hard for me to speak, with LRP contracts and marketing the way they do off of the grid, live basis, etc. I think there's ways to be making money there. How all that ebbs and flows through their facility and some of the managers they're working with. I'm not really sure on all that, but there's optimism, but yet prices are high.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit on it too. Optimism is high, but prices are high. It scares a lot of guys, and I think a lot of guys out there are kind of worried about profitability, right? And understanding kind of your ROI and your cost of gains and kind of all that stuff that goes into the profitability of a cattle operation is really, really important right now. There were times, way back in the day where you could always buy cattle and pencil in an easy $20 to $30 a head on them fairly easily, and it would be, you would maybe some years get, $50 a head more than what you thought, or maybe even $100 more a head than what you thought. But then, you would lose maybe $10 on that, right? But you were always going to make a little bit of money. And nowadays that's just, it's not always given. So with those high-priced feeder calves and those high-priced yearlings, It's really, really important right now to focus on kind of what you're doing to maybe help reduce some of your costs, some of your input costs, really get the most out of the cattle that you're feeding today. And I think that's something that producers really need to focus on here in the next coming years while we try to rebuild this cow herd and see maybe some of these feeder prices go down, hopefully.
So I guess when I'm working with some of these producers and some of these feed yards background guys, I see a lot of issues. Some operations are run pretty smooth and those issues are pretty minimal. Some operations have bigger problems. Everybody has their own issues, right? But when looking at some of this stuff, we accept some of this stuff as an industry standard. I guess what are some of the things you see out there? How are diets formulated? How are some of these guys making their choices? Who are they using to get some of this info back to them, or who are they using for nutritionists, and what are you seeing out there in the country?
Yeah, I think it varies quite a bit, right? What guys are doing. Size plays a role in some of it. How many heads you have on feed can kind of play a role in some of that. But personality, I think, plays a pretty big role on it too. Some guys are really dialed in on what they're trying to do and know a lot of their numbers. Really can tell you, what their typical feed efficiencies are, what their typical cost of gains are, what their profitability is, or at least what they can estimate it pretty well what their profitability is when those cattle kind of come in, based on years of data collection. Other guys maybe don't know all those numbers, right? Maybe some guys know what cattle come in weighing. They know what they do when they sell them. They know how many days on feed they are. So they can tell you, we get this kind of average daily gain, but we don't have, we don't know feed efficiency. We don't know how much they've eaten. We don't track it. We don't have a performance beef or a cattler system to help us track feed. We do our best to write it down in the tractor cab while we're loading, but, those papers get lost or whatever, right? So I think one thing guys could really do is start to track as much data as they possibly can, right? If you don't track data today, that's something that's very important to do. The more data you have and the more data points you have on your own operation, it helps you make decisions on buying cattle, because if you don't know where you bid, it's hard to know where you can go with the next group, right? So if you know those numbers, it gives you an advantage on purchasing and knowing that you can maybe pay a little more for a group because you know what you can do with them. I would say the other thing that a lot of guys do is typically they look at their feedstuffs on farm. Not everybody, but there's some guys out there that will look at their feedstuffs on farm and not price them the way that maybe they should, right? So maybe you look at that silage pile and, say today corn is, corn last fall was, like right around $4.50, give or take. So they throw, $45 a ton on that silage pile. And what they don't think about is all the shrink they lose on that silage pile, right? The dry matter loss of stuff, and they don't fully get the full value out of that pricing, and then maybe they're shortchanging themselves on what they're actually paying for that product. Then I also see just some performance things, right? You mentioned diets and looking at the way that people have been doing diets out there in the country. If you go back and listen to episode 2 of our podcast, we kind of went over what makes Profectus livestock a little bit different on nutrition, right? We tend to balance, or we don't tend to, we do balance things based on amino acids and effective energy and that ratio of amino acids to energy. When you look at the industry standard, they really just pay attention to, NEG and then either crude protein or metabolizable protein. A lot of what we see on those things is maybe some overeating on cattle. Overeating energy, over-consuming energy, and that can lead to like some ruminant health issues. That can lead to acidosis, bloats. I get phone calls from you, fairly often talking about, hey man, this guy's facing a lot of late-term deads, right? I mean, that's probably something you run into the country a lot with, right?
Right. No, I mean, late-term deads in a finishing feed yard has got to be one of the biggest headaches out there. I mean, that's the animal you have the most dollars invested to, most time invested to, most feed invested to. And so, when you see a late-term dead go down, it's usually a big issue. Yeah.
Yeah. That's like you said, that's a huge issue because you have all that money and time and feed invested into it, and it's never the lightweight 1200 that's going to be sold at the bottom end of the group. It's always that big 1,450 pound steer that's ready to go in about 30 days, and then you come outside and never had a problem with it once, and it tips over and dies on you, right? And a lot of that can be tracked back to probably some rumen health issues and some overeating problems. Some of the other issues that that we see out there, as far as costing guys money is probably treats, right? Having to retreat animals, having some erratic intake problems through weather stresses, having maybe just some poor balanced diets, right? That's another one, where guys are just trying to, maybe feed the lowest cost commodity they can, right? But then they don't have it balanced properly. So bringing in that lowest cost commodity with the poorly balanced ration is actually probably costing them more money than it's saving them. There's a lot of those things that can really impact your bottom line if you're not closely paying attention to kind of what you're doing on performance, right? So there's a lot of things out there that I think people just kind of either don't always think about before they make a decision, or they make that decision and they don't track it, right? So they don't know if it was the right decision or the wrong decision moving forward.
I think you've touched on a lot of good points, and some of the things I want to also emphasize on is starting cattle on feed. That's got to be one of the biggest issues in the small, lightweight, backgrounding calves, and we tend to fight it every year. That's when health seems to kind of fall. There's always a 21-day period there right at the beginning where we seem to battle some issues. And so, the first 21 days are super crucial, getting cattle started on feed, on the proper ration, getting those intakes and water consumption where it needs to be, getting vaccines timely in there. So starting cattle on feed has got to be just as big of an issue as probably the late-term deads.
Oh, yeah, I would say so, too. If you can get them started right and get them going in the right trajectory pretty quick, you're obviously setting yourself up for success later. If those cattle kind of falter at the very beginning and you have some of those erratic intakes at the very beginning, you're going to fight some issues there, right? Because a lot of times those calves are seeing a feed bump for maybe the first time. A lot of those calves are maybe seeing fermented feeds for the first time, like silage or high moisture corn for the first time, earlage. It's a big change for their system. So if you don't dial those things in pretty well, you're not going to see those calves' full potential later on, more than likely, right? You're going to have some fallouts. You're going to have some issues. You're going to probably see some cattle break with diseases within that 14 to 21 days. I would predict. But yes, you're right. Starting cattle is probably the second worst headache for most guys after those late term deads, right? So.
Well, when I'm listening to you talk and I'm thinking about the way Profectus does feed rations and then the standard industry based on crude protein and NEG, and then I think about kind of the industry and what we've added to feed rations. We've added ionophores, biomosses, different types of products, some buffers. There's different things that we've added into the feed stuff, but we never really looked at the whole project, the whole formulation. And so as you're talking, I guess, what's your opinion on some of these additives? And then do you see, does the way diets have been formulated throughout history make sense to why that we've had some of these additives?
I think so. I think some of these additives really do a good job of working well. They do their job. There's a lot of additives out there that will help to reduce maybe some oxidative stress, right? That's a big thing when you're asking an animal to perform at a high level, right? Anytime you ask a mammal to grow at a rate like we're asking these cattle to do, they're going to build up oxidative stress. So some of these products out there they can fix some of those issues. Good products. But some of these products are also trying to maybe fix some nutritional issues that we're seeing in the industry, right? Some of those acidosis things, some of that subacute acidosis, some of those bloating, some of those late-term deads. These products are trying to fix it when really what we probably need to look at is how is that diet being balanced, and is it a truly well-balanced diet rather than just trying to throw more additives at it that are just going to add costs later on, right?
Right. So with a lot of what you said here so far, looking at the industry standards and the way diets are formulated and some of these additives are added into the programs, does Profectus Livestock Solutions do anything different, and what do they do on that side of things on the feed ration side to improve some of these standard issues that we're seeing?
Yeah, so we in most of our in all of our diets and all of our supplements, unless it's requested to not be in there, we still use ionophores, right? Like that's something we still believe in too. They help improve feed efficiency, help with cocci control to a certain extent. We still use a lot of that stuff, but what we really believe is that our formulation of diets can help solve some issues, and it can also help bring the cattle producer a little bit more margin in their cattle. So looking at when we get these diets balanced properly for that energy to amino acid ratio is balanced properly, and the cattle can get what they need out of the diet to grow at the rate we want them to grow. We typically see improvements in a lot of performance metrics. So a lot of times we'll either see average daily gains go up, and maybe cost to gain stay the same, right? So you have less days on feed, but your feed cost to gain stays the same, but you get more weight per day, right? So we're still adding more value because we get to the end point maybe a little bit faster, less days on feed, but our cost to gain may be the same as what you were currently doing. Other times we may see maybe only a slight advantage in average daily gain, or maybe the same average daily gain, but our cost to gain is down anywhere from 3 to 8 cents, just depending on kind of where you fall in the range of what you're doing today, right? We do typically see an increase in feed efficiency. So a lot of times on our diets, you'll see cattle tend to eat less, but either gain the same or more on that. So that decrease in feed efficiency really helps us to drive the reduction in cost to gain. So with all of those things in mind, we really see an increase in profitability, anywhere from like a $20 to a $50, right? Of more dollars to the cattle producer on just those performance metrics, right? And that's mostly in finishing yards. When you really take a look at the backgrounding side of things, I think it's a little bit harder to quantify it, because cost to gain is something, right? We do have that advantage in cost to gain with those backgrounders as well. Anywhere from that 2 to 7 cents probably with those backgrounding guys. But our real value there could be that increase in average daily gain, right? So we can get those cattle to a heavier weight a little bit quicker. We've talked about it on the previous podcast. The look of those cattle is really nice, and it's hard to quantify that when we go to a sale barn and those cattle are kind of top of the market. And how many more dollars are they getting out of that animal because of the way they look, at that average daily gain that they had. Whereas if they maybe grew those cattle at the same rate of gain and didn't use our approach, how fleshy would they be and how many dollars would they lose, right? Like that's kind of hard to quantify a little bit. But there is definitely some dollars on the table there for guys to capture by just turning those cattle over faster, having that eye appeal. Anytime you can get less days of feed on cattle, and cattle are in your yard for less time, it basically minimizes risk, because the quicker you get them off your yard, the faster you get a check for them, the less the bad things can happen for them, right? You get a calf, you get a finishing steer out of your barn 20 or 30 days faster. That's 20 or 30 days less for that thing to die on you for some reason, right? Break a leg, roll up on a mound and get tipped over and not be able to get back up. All sorts of those weird things that guys see every year that happen. The fewer days on feed, the less chances of those kind of things happening. Not to mention in this economic environment where interest is fairly high, the less days on feed you have, the less interest you're paying, right? So that's another big key factor in this all. But from like a performance standpoint, that is typically what we see, and it's pretty consistent, right? We have several field trials that we've done with guys where we always see, either that reduction in cost to gain or an improvement in average daily gain with the same cost to gain. And then we have some instances where we've seen both, right? Where we see maybe a 2 to 3 cent advantage in cost to gain and a half a pound increase in average daily gain. So it is possible to get those kind of results as well.
This economic time is crazy and margins are thin. It sounds like Profectus Livestock Solutions has just a model of ration work that we haven't really seen in the industry, and you're telling us that we can hedge out a lot more dollars than what we can do on a standard industry model. And I think if you're not looking at something like that, you really should be. There's a lot of feed companies. I talked to a gentleman the other day. He said, after 40 years of feed salesmen coming to me, I finally have somebody coming to me with a different formulation of diets and a different set and way of thinking and doing things that's going to show me some profitability.
Yeah, for sure. With the performance side that we mentioned, that's one side of it. One thing we do typically see too for guys is an increase in carcass weight. So if you do sell them into the meat or sell them on the grid, either way, we do typically see anywhere from like 8 to 15 pound heavier carcass. So that right there, right now, with the way beef is priced, for fat cattle, you're looking at anywhere from 3 to 310 a pound for hanging weight. So if you can get 10 pounds, you're looking at $30 to $32. It's real money right there. That's sometimes your profitability, right? So there are things that we can do to help kind of increase your margin, increase your ROI, and do it all through nutrition with the feedstuffs that you have on your farm today. So.
Yeah, I'm looking at it, and it's kind of a 3-part series with your diets. It seems like your diets are more well-balanced. You're having better health with lower costs and treatments. It sounds like you're having better feed efficiency and cost to gain with your diets, and it sounds like you're having some heavier carcass weights and getting cattle out the door a little quicker on the back end without hurting any of the grades of the primes and the choice. Is that kind of sound about right?
Yeah. I mean, that's a lot of what we see from guys. There's a lot of verbal testimonials. We'll say maybe you can call it anecdotal data, where we've seen a lot of guys that will tell us, in some of these field trials that we did, we didn't have as many treats on this group, which is very common to hear, especially if they are already kind of treating a lot of cattle. If we walk into someone's yard and their treat rate is 2%, right? We're probably not going to move that needle too much because that's still pretty low. But if they were in there treating 10 or 15%, now we can maybe move that needle a little bit for them and bring that down. The other big thing back to health is one thing the guys say is these cattle respond really well after they get treated. So a lot of times guys will see intakes kind of dip after treatment. A lot of times on our diets, guys will say that they treat an animal, they don't have to retreat as many. So they may get that first treat, but they have a lot fewer second pulls. And that second and third pull is really what tanks cattle, right? That first pull, they can usually bounce back and still perform really well. That second pull, you're going to start to see some performance issues later on in life. And then that third pull is kind of, they're going to struggle, right? So if we can reduce those second and third pulls, that's really what we kind of see. And that saves guys a lot of dollars because those cattle can still perform after that first pull. And then to your point, you're correct, right? We do have an impact on health. We typically do see better performance, or at least a lower cost to gain and better feed efficiency. And then, that added weight on the carcass is something that gets overlooked sometime with our diets, but it's there very consistently. We have a lot of research from Dr. Curley that shows that half an inch bigger ribeye area, right? And that doesn't seem like a lot, but that just speaks to that we're putting more muscle and we're putting more carcass on these animals consistently, and that just adds to dollars in your pocket. So,
very nice. Looking out in the country, you see a lot of producers, you do a lot of diets, you see a lot of cattle. When you're looking at some of that stuff and they're expressing some of these concerns to you about margins and economics, trying to hedge cattle, market them, how does PLS come as an approach? How are we here to help you as a company and help you do some of that stuff?
Yeah, so I think PLS as a company is kind of unique because we do have a team of nutritionists and a team of veterinarians, right? So marketing wise, we don't do any of that really, but we do help you to really set up a good program, right? And we're a very consultative, servicing approach company. So what our goal is to bring you everything that you need to succeed, without a whole lot of fluff. And our goal is to get you as profitable as we possibly can, right? So if we can bring you a solution that's going to help you save money in the long run, we're going to do it, right? If there's a solution out there that we think that fits for this guy but doesn't fit for you, we'll be very honest and tell you, like, hey, this just isn't for you, right? Like what you're doing now is just fine, and we're not going to try to sell you something you don't need, right? I think that's a big thing that we do as a company is we're not really out there to try to push any one thing, or we're not trying to make you fit into a box. We're trying to bring solutions that are going to bring you profitability, right? Rather that be nutrition or veterinarian supplies, or we sell a hay inoculant that's a really good product nowadays. So we have a lot of different options for guys to kind of get in a portfolio of ours. But we'll never push any one thing to you if we don't think it's a good fit for you and is going to give you some sort of return on investment.
Well, I think your company name kind of speaks for itself. Profectus Livestock Solutions. Profectus is Latin for profitability. And in this industry with thin margins and high stress load and what we're dealing with today, I think people have to be diligent, and I think they have to be thinking about any way they can help the next generation survive on the farm and the family ranch, and it is all about the bottom line. It's about profitability. It's about ROI, and putting the money back in the producer's pocket.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you guys for joining another episode of our podcast, brought to you by Profectus Livestock Solution. I'm Devin Stricherz, and this is my guest, Brandon Rodriguez. Like and share. Brandon, any other comments?
No, thanks for having me today. Look forward to doing it again. So.